So you recognize Stephen Hawking there, probably one of the most brilliant men of our modern times. Before we understood science, it was natural to believe that God created the universe, but now science offers a more convincing explanation. Well, that's according to one of the highest IQ people that we've had in recent times. And so you see that intelligent quotient or IQ doesn't necessarily indicate whether you're going to be a theist or an atheist. The way that Tom Shigrew described it in the philosophy chapter is in the text. At present, man is in a state of great spiritual darkness. I want to point out that this book was started in the late 30s when World War II was kicking off. So that's what it's talking about, not necessarily at present where we are now. So at present, man is in a state of great spiritual darkness, the darkness which precedes the dawn. He has carried his skepticism to the point where it is forcing him to conclusions he knows are intuitively wrong. At the same time, he has carried his investigation of natural phenomena to the point where it is disproving all it seemed to prove in the beginning. So what happens as we go further and further into science, we're coming up with answers that are limited by what we are able to measure and understand within 3 dimensions. Knowing that our true nature is outside of time, space, and energy and matter, you wind up having the answers, the true answers, being beyond our ability to handle it with a scientific method. And so there becomes a real disconnect in there between those two things. So you have God is the singularity, the divine singularity, existing outside the domain of science, and it is the source of everything. As the text says, free will is finding that all roads lead finally to the same destination. Science, theology, and philosophy have no desire to join forces. They are approaching a point of merger. Skepticism faces destruction by its own ban. Reminded of a Cayce reading in which it was asked if God would eventually be able, or if humanity would eventually be able to scientifically prove the existence of God. And Casey's answer, as I remember hearing it from other people who studied the readings, was absolutely. However, by then, almost all of humanity will accept that God exists. So we're going to get so far down the road only because we're approaching that point of a merger in which science, theology, and philosophy are coming together, and we are going to understand that there is a physical universe and there is a ethereal or astral universe, that really there is a point of merger between them. We just don't understand it as yet. I don't know if you've ever run into a face reader. It's kind of like what people do reading palms or even the bumps on the head and that sort of thing. But you're seeing the way that they break the body down from the chin up to the top of the forehead into the 7 centers of the body. And you can see an outline of a body around the eyes and the nose and the mouth that indicate the 7 different chakras and where they land or what they're telling you about when you look at someone's face. So everything about us is actually written into the our physiognomy, as it's referred to, whether it's the face, whether it's the palm, even in the iris of the eye. Anyway, the text says, man is at all times the total of what he has been and done, what he has fought and defended, what he has hated and loved. In the 3 dimensional consciousness of the earth, every atom of his physical body is a reflection of his soul, a crystallization of his individuality. So, just in the same way that the DNA of the human body coming from the parents winds up shaping what kind of a lifetime the baby, us, as we are born, is going to have. So, we take on some of the things that come from the parents, and some of the things that are in the rest of the DNA going in is probably from karmic conditions and things like that. I should point out that the Cayce readings say that Jesus was indeed from a virgin birth, that Mary became pregnant without having a father, a corporeal or physical father. But not only that, Mary was of a virgin birth. So there were 2 generations needed in order to produce the perfect human form that was completely perfect, like stem cells, in its formation, and required 2 generations of virgin births to kind of sift out, if you will, all of the things that would affect his DNA and the forming of the physical body of Jesus, so that it would have none of the karma, if you will, from the lineage from which he came. Wayne Dyer, we miss that guy. He was a good man. Our lives are a sum total of the choices we have made. And it's reflected in the text here where it says his emotional and nervous structures, his mental abilities, his aptitudes, his aversions and preferences, his fears, his follies, his ambitions, his character are the sum of what he has done with his free will since it was given to him. So every personality, the earthly cloak of individuality, is different from every other personality. What the text is really indicating here is there's kind of an overall person who our soul becomes through all of the experiences that we have had throughout eternity. What is happening in the lifetime is that we have an individual personality that may be different from other lifetimes that we have, depending on the soul lessons that we're trying to learn this time. We may need to be an introvert one time and an extrovert another time. And there are aspects of us that we can bring forward as we send some of the other aspects of our personality to the background to be able to heighten or focus on having those sorts of karmic conditions come into our lives. Are you an old soul or a new soul? I'll get into the definitions of that in a minute, but here's the text. This has been true from the beginning. The first independent thought of each soul was little different from the first independent thought of every other soul. So remember when I talked about we were all singing in unison when God created us, and then God said, you know what? You've got free will. You should go out there and start experimenting. See what you can contribute to my symphony using your own creativity. And then we started to have chords, and we started to have counter melodies and singing and around and what have you. So that is, but the very first deviations that we have from God's thinking and perfection, that there's probably very little difference between the two. Now, are you an old soul or a new soul? Since all souls are eternal, they're exactly the same age because they've always been and will always be. However, when we describe somebody as an old soul, I would say that that is describing somebody who has been in the earth and reincarnated into human form many times. Because have you ever noticed that some people just seem to fit in a lot better than others? And that could definitely just be because of a personality quirk, but it could also be that there are, relatively speaking, souls incarnating that don't have as much experience being able to integrate into whatever society is around them. And the more often you've integrated into society from one incarnation to another, the better you'll be at it. So this is an old soul is one that you can just see catches on to things very quickly, integrates into the human life. And remember, if you're alive now, chances are you were alive and living back in Atlantis where you had a higher tech society. So that's how come you can have a much older generation not catching on to technology quite as easily as the youngsters. You know, if you need your computer fixed, go get a 5-year-old. How does karma affect your life? Well, I'll get into that in a little detail, but let me read the text here. So people are different in their likes and dislikes, and their desires and dreams. The law of karma, cause and effect, likewise makes them different in their joys and sorrows, and their handicaps, their strengths, their weaknesses, their virtues and vices, their appreciation of beauty, and their comprehension of truth. Debts incurred in the flesh must be met in the flesh. Natural law, not man or God, demands eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Now, I do want to point out that this is natural law would be like the laws of physics and that sort of thing. If I drop something and it falls, it's not because God says, I want that object to fall. set from the very beginning when he said, let there be light. If you remember going way back to the first video now, if you have the 2x4 bringing the light bulbs back and then they start swinging like pendulums, that is the natural law of how they started to interact and form with each other. So natural law demands that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that if we incurred debts in the flesh, karmic debts, that we must meet those or meet our karma in the flesh as well. Now, I do want to say, how does karma affect your life? And we are told in the Cayce readings that we are never given more than we can bear. Let me differentiate a little bit on that because I think people are given more than they can bear, but it's only because they chose to take it on. Our free will is not hampered. As we come in, the karmic conditions that are naturally drawn toward us are not more than we can bear. If we get in there and we start making bad choices so that we have so much descending upon us in bad karma that we can't handle it anymore, it's not because that was the plan when we came in. Just wanted to make that one clear. Kind of a chilling picture there on the top of its rather detailed drawing of what it was like back when Hitler was addressing the Nazi Party back in the World War II era. The same law applies to groups of people as they act together. There is karma for families, for tribes, for races, for nations. When the souls who committed a war return to a nation, a war will be committed upon that nation, as in retribution. Only when defeat is endured by a nation with humility and understanding, only when victory is dispensed by a nation with justice and mercy, will the karma of the battle be lifted from them. Now, understand, this is defining karma much differently than most people think, because a lot of people think of karma as I did this bad thing, so I have to have this bad thing happen to me. That's not wrong. However, it's not punitive, it's instructive. And the problem is just because we endured the bad thing happening to us, if we didn't learn from it, we're doomed to repeat that whole pattern all over again until we do. And so unless we meet a unhappy situation or person or people with love, with patience, with cooperation, the karma will continue until we figure out how to do it correctly. Individual karma versus group karma looks a little bit like the following. Every person's life is shaped to some extent by karma, his own, that of his associates and loved ones, that of his nation and race, and that of the world itself. But these, singly or together, are not greater than free will. It is what the person does about these influences and urges, how he reacts to them, that makes a difference in his soul development. Because of karma, some things are more probable than others, but so long as there is free will, anything is possible. I can tell you that I won't go into a long-term story about it, but this is I'm sorry, going to 2023 when this video is being made in September. And I go back to when 2020 happened and all of a sudden we had all of the COVID came out. I have to say that within my own family, we only prospered within those times. I can say because of my lifestyle that it didn't really change my lifestyle very much. I already like to do outdoor sports where there is social distancing, and I did it all the time. And none of that changed when I was involved in that. So then and then with my wife, all of a sudden she had going to work and having to commute to work every day, winds up being told you need to work out of the house, and she's going to remain there. So she has this incredible good karma coming out of that situation of now she gets to work from home and is a much happier person for it and being able to handle all these things. So it is possible that if you don't choose through your free will to participate in the atrocities that are going on around you, your life can improve even though the rest of the world seems to be going in the other direction. Thus, free will and predestination coexist in a person. His past experiences limit him in probability and incline him in certain directions, but free will can always draw the sword from the stone. There's a Cayce reading that talked about how well does astrology predict what the coming karmic conditions are in our life. And you would think that would be a very long answer from Cayce. It was very short. He said 20%. I'm not kidding. 20%. And what that indicated was, well, especially he said that about astrology, but it was also true of numerology. It was true of I Ching. It was true of tarot. It was true of any one of the methods that people use to forecast the future. Now, if I add up 6 of those 20%, I have 120%, and it sounds like everything is predestined. Not true. What it means is that only 20% of what happens to us is set up by our karmic conditions, by the causes that we put into motion in the past, have the effect coming in now, and 20% of what unfolds before us is because of the choices we've made in the past. What that tells you is that free will commands and takes care of 80% of what happens from there. So what happens when we have a karmic event take place is certainly that happened, but how we react to it is 80% of what's going to happen in the future. So free will and predestination does mean that they coexist within the same person. And guess what? Free will has a 4-to-1 edge over the predestination. Again, I'm showing you a thumbnail of a Cayce clip video. It's maybe 5-6 minutes long, and it's one of the more popular ones we have. People really want to know how we choose our families before we were born. And you're going, did I really pick my parents, or did I pick my siblings or the rest of the family? And the answer is yes. So the text here says, no soul takes on flesh without a greater plan for the experience ahead. The personality expressed through the body is one of many which the individuality might have assumed. Its job is to work on one or several phases of the karma of the individuality. No task is undertaken which is too much for the personality to which it is assigned or which it chooses. If you were to look at the video, and it's on the same Edgar Cayce channel as you found this video, and you go back, it talks about what conditions take place in order to be able to have the parents get together and have you as one of their children. But this is a plan that is not just yours, but everybody tends to agree at a higher level, on a soul level. They go, we're going to be your parents, and you go ahead and come in through our human bodies. It's not a conscious process that takes place, although ideally it would be. But right now we haven't progressed to that level of soul development. So it happens through the law of attraction, and it happens through people making covenants with each other as far as what they're going to accomplish in the upcoming life and what they're going to work on. Again, with the free will and predestination, some souls choose their own entrances and set their own tasks. Others, having made too many mistakes and become dangerously subject to earthly appetites, are sent back by law at a time and under circumstances best suited to help them. The task is seldom perfectly fulfilled, and sometimes it is badly neglected. Let me go back to the video that I mentioned right here. I'll give you enough detail of it, and maybe it'll make you want to watch it. That'd be great. But I liken the process by which we go and choose what the conditions of our next life are going to be as school. So when you go into K through 12, you wind up having this progression of you have nothing to say. If you're not very far along in the program, you have nothing to say about the individual lessons that you're going to learn. And that would be somebody that hasn't spiritually progressed on the earth very much. They just say, here, go into this body and do your best. As we get toward the grade 12 part of that, we are given some flexibility of what classes we would be allowed to take over the required ones that come along. So you get greater flexibility about the classes, even the teachers, if you want. And then when you get from high school into college, and let's call that a higher level of spiritual progression in choosing your future life, now you not only get to choose the classes, but the days and the times and the teachers that you're going to have, with the major being your ultimate choice is what direction you want to go. So it makes sense as far as being able to figure that out, the free will and predestination. According to some souls, have a lot more flexibility than others in order to be able to get there. I'd like the reason for the graphic of the lottery is I kind of use the lottery as an example for how bodies are assigned to particular souls. So if you have a zygote comes into being, the Cayce readings actually indicate a period of time that the soul may get assigned, if you will, or accept that body as being the one they're going to be incarnated into as early as 6 months ahead of time. It can even be, in one case, I think it said it was a month after the body was born, because there were still things that were gelling and trying to figure out if it was a good fit for that soul or not. Let me read the text and I'll go into the rest of that. Choice of incarnation is usually made at conception, when the channel for expression is opened by the parents. A pattern made by the mingling of the soul patterns of the parents. This sets up certain conditions of karma. A soul whose karma approximates these conditions will be attracted by the opportunity presented. Now, let me go back to the lottery for a minute. You're sitting there with your lottery ticket, and the first number comes up, and you happen to have that number picked on your lottery ticket. And the second number comes up and you pick that number too. And the third one comes up and you go, no, I didn't pick that number. I'm not going to win the big prize here. But somebody else winds up having the third number as well. And then the fourth number comes up and they're still in it. The fifth number comes up, oh, they didn't have that one. And so all the people that had as many as four of the numbers fall to the wayside. The people that had up to five are sitting there going, wow, all I got to do is match one more number and I'm going to be a very wealthy person here. Or in the case of figuring out who's the winner of that body. And so the sixth Powerball or lottery ball comes up and you wind up seeing that it matches yours. The only difference is somebody else may have the sixth number too, or may not. If there's only one, then it's a gimme. You're going to go right to that. If there's two or more that wind up having everything fulfilled within that body, then it would wind up being a negotiation of which one of us will have the greatest spiritual growth by having this opportunity to enter into the earth. So you get an idea of using the lottery in that example of how we wind up making that choice or pick of who ends up with what body. I'll just read the text. Since you can see the pictures, since the pattern will not be exactly his own, he must consider taking on some of the karma of the parents, relatively, in order to use the channel. This concerns environment, companionship with the parents, and certain marks of physiognomy. So in other words, when you're saying, all right, it's not going to be the new child is not going to be an exact match to what I need, there are going to be some, what do you want to say, negotiations as far as saying I'm coming in and I'm going to have very poor or very wealthy parents or somewhere in between, or they fight or they don't get along, or we're going to have a happy family, or and then you have when it comes to the marks of physiognomy, we have the DNA of who are you going to take after, the father or the mother? Sometimes that's good, sometimes not so good in trying to figure that out. So there's a give and take aspect to it that we all negotiate even before we were born. I should explain the graphic on the top. If you've ever heard of a movie called Cloud Atlas, I think it does a good job of being able to show how the continuity of one incarnation to another. In this case, you have two very famous actors, Halle Berry on the top and Tom Hanks on the bottom, showing their three different personalities within the movie. So this is the same soul coming in as three very different personalities. And the movie itself, boy, it's over 3 hours long. But the movie itself shows how the karmic conditions from one life interrelate to the karmic conditions in the next life, despite the different personalities that come through. So here's the text. Things other than pattern concern the soul and its selection of the body, coming situations in history, former associations with the parents, the incarnation at about the same time of souls it wishes to be with, and with whom it has problems to work out. In some cases, the parents are the whole cause of a soul's return. The child will be devoted to them and remain close to them until their death. In other cases, the parents are used as a means to an end. The child will leave home early and be about its business. So it's giving you all a way or examples, a way to look at all the different situations that turn out in people's lives. Sometimes a child never even leaves the home and they care for their parent their whole lives. And other times they're like, I'm 18, I'm out of here, and barely have anything to do with them anymore. And again, the movie Cloud Atlas is a good example of how all that works. Look at that. We actually have a astrology chart for Nikola Tesla up there. Rather interesting. I don't know squat about astrology, but I have the task of running astrology charts that we offer through the Edgar Cayce channel here. And this one's actually pretty well balanced. So as odd a character as he was, or at least portrayed in the movies and books I've read about him, he has a balance of all of these things. There seems to be in the upper right quadrant, like say from 12 to 3, there's nothing. So that could explain where he seems a little out of balance there. If I knew more about astrology, I could tell you what those things are, but I don't. Here's the text. The soul may occupy the body as early as 6 months before birth or as late as a month after birth, though in the latter case, it has been hovering over the body since birth, deciding whether or not to occupy it. Once the decision is made and the occupation completed, the veil drops between the new personality and the soul, and the earthly record of the child begins. When you in the way he describes it as far as that the soul has been hovering over the body since birth, I'm reminded of that same wording being used of souls hovering over the ape-like bodies and working with them through vibration and evolution to be able, even as man counts time, quickly evolve the ape into Homo sapien. We do the same thing. We hover over a body from at a certain point, and we start to influence it in the directions of our free will choices. You can wind up being able to overcome anything in a case like that. So if there are birth defects when we're born, chances are we were counting on having those to be able to be a spiritual challenge for us to deal with in that particular life. Just as there can be a lottery drawing with no one matching the winning numbers, it is possible to have a pregnancy where no soul is suitable to inhabit the body. The child is either stillborn or dies quickly in that case. So I'm just kind of conceptualizing what happens in the text below. The fact that a baby is born dead does not mean that it was refused as a vehicle for the soul. Just the opposite is true. The channel is withdrawn from the soul. No occupation is possible. So it's a question of semantics, but very often there could be all of a sudden the parents decide they're going to get divorced while she's still pregnant, and nobody had seen that coming. That would be a condition in which you're going, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to have married parents that stick together even if they're having trouble to be able to work all that out. Pythagorean theorem. I don't think, I'm not sure, but I have heard a lot of people theorize that the Cayce, one of his past lives was Pythagoras. I have never been able to find the reading that even intimated that. But anyway, I brought it up just because of that. Here's the text. The body is formed in the womb according to the pattern made by the mingling of the life forces of the parents, each with its respective pattern. This is the metaphysical symbolism of the 47th problem of Euclid, the Pythagorean theorem. The square of the hypotenuse of a right triangle is equal to the sum of the squares of the other two sides. So when you see A and B being the parents, the point that connects them at the far end is C, is us, is the child incoming or incarnating into the earth. And so it's you can see that it has to be related and even tangent in various points throughout the existence of mom and dad and ourselves. Kind of interesting graphics there to uh, illustrate the point below. As soon as occupation by a soul takes place, the pattern of the soul begins to work its way through the body and the child's personality begins. So as I said, in that hovering process, or let's look at the glass beaker in the top. What's happening there is that is extremely cold water. And there is an ice cube that is being taken from that prong there in the top, And when I say cold water, I don't mean just 32 degrees Fahrenheit, probably about negative 10 degrees Fahrenheit. And you take an ice cube and you dip it down into the water, and you notice that it's turning that entire amount of water in the beaker to solid ice within seconds. That's not sped up. That's not time-lapse photography. That's how long it takes under those conditions to be able to say, now you pull the trigger and you say, I, the soul, am now going to fully integrate with this body into the physical. I just kind of show the flames down there as well in the according to the colors of the seven spiritual centers or chakras, manifesting and saying, once you light all those up, now I begin to fill the room with my very essence. Again, I come back to the concept that I had before of an iceberg showing your 10% of your current personality is above the water level. It really leaves hidden 90% of who we are below the water level on any given lifetime. But that doesn't mean it's not there to draw on if we needed it. So when people talk about, I drew on some inner strength that I didn't know I had, that would be an indication of where that would come from. So the text says, the personality is a highlighted portion of the individuality, experiencing three-dimensional consciousness. The rest of the individuality remains in shadow, giving tone to the personality, urges, appreciation, tastes, avocations, and what is loosely termed charm, the background to which intuition responds. Okay, so when you're looking at this and saying personality is what's above the water, our individuality is it takes above and below and says this is who we truly are. And so even though it might be different from one lifetime to the next, what is above the water, we are indeed the totality of it and can draw on that if we will be open to it. There's an interesting gathering of people, no particular rhyme or reason to it, but see how it relates to the text. The personality is shaped by 3 or 4 incarnations, the portion of the earthly experience on which the individuality wants to work. The emotions and talents of the person reflect these incarnations. The dreams, visions, meditations, the deep, closely guarded self. Consciousness of the personality is the pattern of experience among the other states of consciousness of the solar system. Now, you remember I talked about the planets are uh, three-dimensional representations of the other dimensions that we go to between our earthly lives in order to be able to learn the lessons that are, uh, shall I call, specialized in those particular dimensions, whether it be, love, patience, cooperation, leadership, and that sort of thing. So you can see that I'm not saying that all of these people were the same individual. Obviously, they couldn't be because lots of them lived at the same time. And it's not that it's impossible to have more than one physical incarnation at a time on the earth with the soul, because Jesus proved that, or the soul Emilius incarnated into the earth as Adam in 5 different bodies, the 5 races throughout the earth. So it's possible to do it. It's just you really need to have a Christ consciousness about you when you would try to do something like that. Otherwise, it would be really hard to understand the cause and effect that's happening to us when we don't have that. The advantage of the earth is to have sequential time and space to be able to say, I did this wrong and this is happening to me. So in the future. So to be able to separate it by sequential time makes it much easier to understand how we're reaping what we have sown. I may not act like a genius, but Mensa says I am. So the text says the intellect is, roughly speaking, from the stars. It is the mind force of the soul, conditioned by its previous experience in creation outside the solar system, and dimmed or brightened by its recent experiences within the solar system. Now, I want to say that we all are omniscient. Remember, we were created in the perfect image of God. And the intellect is, so we have an omniscient intellect to be able to draw from in that 90% that's below the water level. But what it's saying there at the end is even though we have this omniscience, it is dimmed or brightened by our recent experiences within the solar system, on Earth, in the dimensions in between lives, how we deal with all of the challenges that we have in those experiences dictates how smart we're going to be when we go ahead and incarnate back onto the earth. So then you can have all of these different personalities, and you talk about the multiple personalities. Remember, you can come in as male or female when you're looking at this, although we tend to stay to one gender more than another. But look at all the personalities that I'm kind of indicating are all part of the same individual here. So let me read the text and I'll come back to the rest of the description. Thus, a personality is only an aspect of individuality. A soul deciding to experience Earth again might assume any of several personalities, each of which would express a portion of itself. As the soul approaches completion of the solar cycle, the personality becomes more many-sided, the expressing greater portions of the individuality. So, have you ever noticed that as we get older, we seem to get smarter? Even our kids, as they grow up, tend to recognize how much smarter the parents were or are becoming as they recognize that, yes, we gain in wisdom. We go ahead and meet the karma that we have, so that we're reaping what we have sown. But as we manifest from our individuality into our personality, we make a better connection between those two things. And we start to make better decisions as we get older, as we get more mature. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Okay, let me just go to the text and then I'll come back to how it relates. This is because each incarnation has less adverse karma. Actually, this is in the case if we are making better decisions. It's not always true. So, assuming that we are making better decisions as we go, this is because each incarnation has less adverse karma, requiring less attention. Finally, the personality is a complete expression of the individuality, and the cycle is completed. So we keep making better and better decisions until we don't need to be here on the earth anymore. And then there's the other side. As an individuality succumbs to earthiness, abandoning intellect for emotion and emotion for sensuality, it becomes more and more one-sided. This is a description of what happened to us being the perfect children of God, coming into and inserting ourselves, our consciousness into the earth and succumbing to earthiness. All of a sudden, we abandoned the intellect and we became emotional. And then all of a sudden, the emotions started to manifest in carnality or sensuality, as he says it here. And we become more and more selfish. And that's why we're here trying to work our way out. Very much like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Which one of those manifestations of him is going to emerge? And it depends on what he does, right? So there are all sorts of different ways that we can come across to people. As a musician, you've got 4 different ways you can go about this. I'm not sure about the cat, but it's cute, and so that's why it's in there. But you can just be setting the world on fire, or you can be a clown just making jokes out of playing the piano, or you can be a concert piano player like the one in the upper right. So the text says, the incarnations which influence the personality reflect their patterns in the person's life. Sometimes they intermingle. A child's parents may recreate the environment of one experience, while his playmates will recreate the environment of another. So they'll expand on this in the text in the another slide or two. But the important thing to remember here is if your parents aren't going to be able to give you the experiences that are going to set your mind according to what it needs to be able to meet your karma for that lifetime. I'll give you an example of poverty consciousness. Let's say your parents are middle class and they don't have a poverty consciousness, but you can sure pick it up if those are your friends who you hang around with, or you in your own life tend to, even if your parents don't have a poverty consciousness, they think that it will be better for you if they don't buy things for you and that you earn everything yourself. That would be something that could be set up outside of what would happen within the family. And you can have all these different manifestations of the same ability as in playing the piano. Sometimes the influences work in periods. Home and childhood may recreate the conditions of one incarnation. School and college, those of another. Marriage, those of a third. And career, those of a fourth. So you have 4 different things that you could be working on in the example they just gave right there. And each of those was developed within a particular period within our lives. Usually the people and the problems of the incarnations have interlocking relationships, so that the pattern of the personalities experience is a rational development, and the problems are presented to him as he is prepared to meet them. So we do try to be able to make sense of it. It's not that they're unrelated. We start to see how the interlocking relationships of those 4 periods of our life and the lessons that we're going to learn from each one of those wind up being able to seamlessly fit together. Because the incarnations only reflect their problems, their blessings, as well as their handicaps, usually the karma of more than one can be undertaken in a single lifetime. If the life is successful, considerable progress is made toward freedom from flesh. So, a good example of this, and boy, this is a tough example, but it sure makes it clear as far as what do we do when we've been handed a really tough situation to work with. In this case, I use the example of child molestation. In many cases, you can wind up having a child molester become a parent, and the child that is drawn to them is just a child that has child molestation karma coming to them, and it draws them together like magnets. All right. Then there's another way that that can happen, and that is the child molester parent has a child coming to them, and you could be a soul on the other side that says, I really want to help this individual overcome it. I want to give them their best opportunity to make better choices and to not molest the child. I will come into that particular life and I will be as non-ferrous metal to them. Aluminum isn't attracted to magnets. So what happens is you have this molester over here who would possibly draw somebody that has karma of being molested drawn to them. In this case, you come in and go, I don't have that karma coming to me. I am not automatically drawn to you. Now, they can go out of their way to go ahead and make that happen, but you were giving them the best opportunity possible that there were no outside influences to make that happen. And so if they wind up do molesting you, then what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to forgive them. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Allow it to just pass through your life and not affect you into the future as you go forward in joy and happiness and how you relate to other people. And make it as a good role model for other people to see how to be able to handle a situation like that if they become aware of it. Now, here's the interesting thing. I just said, what do you do then? It makes a lot of sense. You didn't have the karma coming to you. Just act like, you're a willow in the wind so that the wind is coming through. And even though it kind of pushed you out around for a little bit, you go back to a normal position. The exact same advice is true for the one who was a molester in the past, had that karma coming, and they come together. They have the same choice in front of them. They should be like the willow in the wind going, I'm not going to let it, mess up my mind. I'm going to go forward just as if I hadn't had it coming to me. And the interesting thing is, how does Jesus look at this? When Jesus ran into the woman that he said, he who is without sin cast the first stone, and everybody took off, that left the woman there. And he goes, neither do I condemn thee. Go forth and sin no more. That's huge. Think about that for a second. What God is telling you is it doesn't matter whether you sinned or not. You come into a situation, you have something negative happen to you, and you just act as the willow in the wind, allow yourself to go back to center, become balanced again, and act as a perfect role model for people as far as how they should handle severe situations like that in their own life. Now, what this really does is it takes the fear, guilt, and shame out of the person who was molested. They're going, you know what? It doesn't matter whether I had the karma coming to me or I was trying to give the best opportunity to the person who molested me. The difference is zero. We are supposed to go forward because God doesn't condemn us. He says, go forth and sin no more. Go forward and don't make the same mistake again. So we don't have to hang ourselves up on whether we had the negative karma, and it doesn't have to just be molestations. It can be lots of negative karmic situations in our life, and we're thinking, did I actually do that to other people? Or was I coming in as Jesus did? Jesus didn't deserve to be crucified, came in to give everybody an opportunity to measure up to the best that was in themselves. And when that didn't happen, Jesus then said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, and made one hell of a role model for us by rising from the dead and saying, see, it really does work. Carl Jung, most of you have probably heard of him. Quote from him, I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. And very much an illustration of what I was just talking about. When a life is finished, the personality vanishes. Its pattern is absorbed into the individuality. Its record is retained, but it becomes a part of the individuality, which at all times is the sum total of what it has been, all it has thought, all it has experienced, all it has eaten, drunk, and felt through the ages. In other videos, I have talked about what Cayce calls a group soul that really makes this a lot more clear. A group soul is what Cayce says is in charge of the animal kingdom. Now, when if you think of, in fact, Cayce was asked about a family dog from 4 different members of the family, same dog, in 4 different readings to the family members, and they all asked about the dog. So we got various, I won't go into the details of it, but it was asked, have I had this dog with me in previous incarnations? And Cayce said, yes, in previous incarnations, the dog was a protector. In fact, was a lion that would accompany you into battle and protect you. Okay, so you wind up, it isn't that dogs always come back as dogs, as humans always come back as humans, according to the Cayce information. And Cayce even made it in the reading, and you understand the family and who they were, said the dog still acted like a lion, even though it was a little kind of bing dog. It was still very protective and acting like a lion in its little tiny dog form instead of being the big lion. But the idea is what the group soul is very easy to think of it in terms of a hand. I've used this example before, but imagine that you're a cat, a dog, a ferret, whatever animal you have, and these are the individual manifestation of the group soul that is right here. And as one of them were to pass away, then it still remains as the group soul. But those experiences as the individual animals still retained within the group soul. This is what is very similar to what we're talking about with our different personalities being a part of, absorbed into the individuality. Can that personality come out exactly again? Yes, if we will it to. And the same thing is true when you wind up having the group soul saying, I want to reincarnate as this person's dog, very similar to what it had in the past, or I want to combine the best of what the past dogs were, and so I'm going to have, it's very loving, and this one's very healthy, and this one's friendly to other people, and you take all those traits and you put it into a single dog, and and so it's a combination of past personalities together, because that's what you're able to do when you have a group soul. It's not different for a human. It's just that instead of it being different animals, it's all through our different incarnations as humans. You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop. Very Buddhist concept. The text says, here is an example of how extremes may meet. Both the atheist and the Christian seem to be right, at least to themselves. The atheist says the personality does not survive after death. The Christian says the soul is judged after death and returns to its creator. Substituting personality for soul, both are expressing a truth. The personality is judged, returns to its creator, the individuality, and is absorbed, giving up its own independent existence. So the personality is the thing that is really very temporary, and it's more of a function of a particular lifetime in which we have to have our personality be such in order to be able to learn the karmic lessons on the individuality or the soul level. Reincarnation, a new creation. So you see as one door closes, another door opens, and that's, in the graphic there, we're kind of indicating as we leave and go into the other side, we can also come back in as a new child as we have a new life to enter into. The general plan for perfecting the individuality in its experience of the solar system then proceeds. Another state of consciousness is assumed as a trial or as a means of reinforcing the character of a future personality. So it's just, once again, as we pass away in the physical, we go to another dimension where we work on whatever the particular aspect. I mentioned another one there, that leadership in Jupiter. Notice again the Greek and Roman mythology that mythology that said Jupiter was the king of all, or ruler of all of the gods and goddesses on Mount Olympus, and there we're talking about it being a leadership dimension where you work on your management, your leadership skills, and being able to lead and guide other people. So the problems of individualities, the problems of groups, the problems of races and nations are worked upon time and again until, by free will, they are solved. And the souls go on to other worlds and other systems and other universes. The readings say, know that thyself in its physical state is a part of the plan of salvation, of righteousness, of truth, of the creative forces or God in the earth. Now, that's the whole, I mentioned this in the previous video, the whole point of the book, The Gates of Arcturus, was to follow a number of lives that Cayce gave that were past lives for Emilius or Jesus. There are a few, it's a novel, by the way, and each one of the lifetimes that I indicate in there is a fictional portrayal of what the challenges were for Amelia's in those particular lifetimes. And so it shows where we tend to fall, why we tend to fall, what lessons we learn along the way. Each chapter starts with a life review in which we say, how did I do in that life? Oh, I didn't do so well here. I didn't do so well, but here I really did gain. And when you take a look at it from that perspective, even though it's an entertaining book as you go through, it tends to come off as a number of Aesop's fables, which, by the way, I think as I studied the Edgar Cayce readings, Aesop was actually a past life of Jesus, as far as that non de plume is in writing all the stories that were so instructive. And so in the Gates of Arcturus, you're able to go through all of that and actually get some very interesting answers, fictionalized, of course, as far as how did Moses part the Red Sea? And how did, staying with Moses, he had some of the greatest ones. How did he cause the earth to stand still so that the lights in the sky, or so that the sun didn't set until his enemies were defeated that day? Those kind of questions are answered in these fictionalized stories. And that's it. So we have time for questions and answers. Obviously, on a YouTube video, I would invite you to go ahead and use the comments section down below. And believe me, we check those on a daily basis and respond to them as quickly as we can get to them. And thank you so much for staying with me through 3 different sections of Edgar Cayce on the philosophy chapter of There Is a River.